Hello and welcome back to the VolReport Show. I'm Ryan Sylvia with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. And today, Tennessee basketball, both men's and women's, got some scheduling news. So I decided before it gets to football season fully, we're 11 days from kickoff here on Tuesday, August 20th, 2024. Before that gets lost in the shuffle completely with football, let's talk a little bit basketball. Let's talk about that scheduling news as we kind of preview this season. So on the men's side of things, that's where we're going to start. It was the SEC schedule revealed. We already knew the opponents, but now we have some dates and kind of the order of games that Tennessee is going to be playing in. On the women's basketball side of things, with Lady Vols and Kim Caldwell's first season, we have the complete out-of-conference schedule now revealed. So let's talk about it. Like I said, starting on the men's basketball side of things, we're just going to go in order. We're going to touch lightly on some games and then talk a little bit more in detail on others. But what a way Tennessee gets this thing started off with. January 4th is going to be game one of the 2024-25 men's basketball SEC slate for Tennessee. And they're going to welcome Arkansas to town. Now, if I told you a year ago today that Tennessee is going to start this next season with Arkansas, you'd probably go, okay, well, Musselman's usually got himself a nice Arkansas team. That's a cool first test for Tennessee. They won the SEC regular season title. Usually they like to make something a little bit spicy in game one of the SEC slate and get some eyes on it. That's a good way. Give them a test with Arkansas. Oh, Arkansas was really bad last year. Okay, well, that makes things a little bit different. Oh, they were so bad, Musselman left the job and went to USC. Okay, well, now that makes things a lot different. Okay, well, who replaces him? John Calipari from Kentucky replaces him. Okay, now things are really interesting. He has to completely rebuild his lineup. And one of the pieces that's probably projected to be their starter at center is Jonas Adu from Tennessee, a guy that kind of surprised the staff a little bit when he announced he was going to enter the transfer portal at all, let alone go to an in SEC school in Arkansas and now play for John Calipari, who's been obviously a rival for Tennessee for the last decade or however long he's been at Kentucky. So a roller coaster for things over in Fayetteville for Arkansas, and they're going to get things at least trying to get back on track with Tennessee in Knoxville. In what an environment that's going to be. I mean, you welcome John Calipari back to Knoxville. It doesn't matter where he's at. I don't think fans of the Vols are going to be very excited to see him, or maybe they will be excited because Rick Barnes has had a decent track record against Calipari in his Tennessee tenure. So I'm sure he'll be well received. And then you have a guy that transferred out, once again, to an SEC program under a rival coach in Jonas Adu. I can't imagine the fan reception for that is going to be great either. So you get things started with a pretty notable game. Once again, that's going to be on January 4th at home against Arkansas. And it'll be interesting to see where those two programs are at heading into that game. You get a little bit of a feel during the out-of-conference slate. You start to understand, just how good some teams are. Of course, there's a lot of improvement that happens throughout SEC play. But that first game, you kind of have a bit of a feeling about the trajectory of both programs. So at that point, we should be able to at least somewhat feel like, okay, how is Tennessee rebounding from losing some key pieces like a Dalton Connect, who's now with the Lakers, a Josiah Jordan-James, who's been here for 5 years, a Santiago Vespi, who's there for 5 years, a Tobe Awaka, who entered the transfer portal to Arizona, Jonas Adu, obviously, over to Arkansas. How are those guys replaced with the incoming transfers and guys like a Felix Okpara and a guy like Chaz Lanier, who's expected to take some of the scoring load away, Darlington Dubar. You go down the list, Igor Milicic. How are those guys fitting in? How is Zakai Ziegler looking at senior season? Jemai Mashak, Jordan Gainey. You'll start to understand where those pieces are a little bit. Tennessee should be a good team next year. The bigger question is Arkansas. When you have that much turnover, it's interesting. I don't know if we've seen it in basketball to this extent yet. I mean, we see it Ole Miss in football with Lane Kiffin utilize the transfer portal as hard as anyone. This is kind of the basketball test of that. And it's different circumstances than Lane Kiffin because he's doing that year after year at Ole Miss. This is Calipari's first season, so we'll see what that mindset looks like down the road for him with the Hogs. But how will that team look? How will that team be meshing at that point? We'll have a little bit of an idea. So that game could look a lot different now than we think it does, or that could look a lot different than we think it does now, or it could live up to the hype, because I think that's one that a lot of people have circled on the calendar. Tennessee's then going to go away at Florida for the first of 2 games against the Gators. Florida's got a good team next year. Golden's doing a good job with the Gators, all things considered. So that is going to be a tricky game for Tennessee, I think, considering it's on the road. It's a game that Tennessee probably should win, maybe. I mean, once again, we're so far away from the season, it's tough to put a full finger on what these teams are going to look like. But Florida's a team that could shock a lot of people, I think, this year and be a really solid basketball team that's going to cause issues. So having a game on the road like that, game 2, either on the 7th or the 8th of January, could be a decent test for Tennessee. Right after that, January 11th, you face Texas, and it's going to be your 4th season in a row playing the Longhorns, but the first time since they joined the SEC. And you have the leg up on them from last year in the most important game of those 4 in March Madness, the round of 32, where you took them down in Charlotte. It was a close game, a 4-point win, but you got the job done. And then you also, the year before that, in Knoxville, you were able to take down Texas when they had a really, really nice team that year as well. So Tennessee's got 2 in a row on them. They lost the game in Austin by 1, a brutal game for Tennessee. If you can think back to that game, that game must have been played in 2020. It was 21-22 season. I think it was played in January of 22. So Tennessee and Texas, it's the first game of an SEC format against the two, but man, are they familiar with each other just from playing each other so often. Chris Beard was there for that first game, but it's been Terry there since then. So they're familiar with each other. Texas is another team that should have a nice program heading into next season, and it should be a pretty decent test for Tennessee again. So you look at those first 3 games, and it's 3 tough matchups. I mean, individually, you wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee lost any of those 3. Now, will they go 0 for 3? I don't think so. But if you just look at it at an individual game standpoint, and I said, hey, Tennessee loses against Arkansas next year. Oh, okay, that's not ridiculous. Tennessee loses against Florida next year on the road. That's not ridiculous. Tennessee loses at Texas next year. That's not ridiculous. So it's 3 tough games for Tennessee right out the gate. But also Tennessee's at a point under Rick Barnes where you could end up going 3-0, and I don't think that's a crazy thing to say either. So that'll tell you a little bit about this team, I think, just those first 3 games, 2 of them on the road, how they respond to some big-time matchups 3 games into the SEC slate. After that, you have Georgia at home. You have Vanderbilt on the road, Mississippi State at home. Won't go too into depth on those 3. Binghamton's first year with Vanderbilt, you have to go to Nashville for that game. It's usually a home game, essentially, for Tennessee whenever they play at Vanderbilt, especially in basketball and football. So that's not those games, once again, I mean, I keep saying it, but we're so far away from basketball season, it feels like it's tough to really fully gauge how good maybe a Vanderbilt team will be in year 1. I don't expect them to be great, though. So Tennessee, that's a 3-game stretch. They probably should win all 3. Mississippi State, obviously a thorn in Tennessee's side last season, so maybe that continues, or maybe Tennessee kind of gets back on track in that series against the Bulldogs with them coming to Knoxville. So those are 3 games. I don't think that anyone has fully like Sharpie circled on their schedule. I can't miss those 3, but it's the SEC, so they're going to be 3 tough games. It's after that another 3-game stretch that could prove brutal. Auburn on the road, Kentucky at home, Florida at home. Now, Auburn with Bruce Pearl has always put together really nice teams, and Tennessee's played them well. You think back to even last year where Don Knecht had to take over down the stretch, but Tennessee played pretty well in that game, and Johnny Broome ended up kind of costing Auburn a little bit, I guess, the way that Tennessee picked on them. But overall, it was a good game played by both sides, and Tennessee just ends up winning. Well, now Tennessee has to go on the road and play in the jungle at Auburn. Not an easy place to play. How is Tennessee going to respond? That's one of the toughest road environments in SEC basketball right now, and you've got to go in there with basketball season in full swing at that point, January 25th. Football season's behind you. Really only 1 NFL game, 2 NFL championship series for the AFC and NFC, and then the Super Bowl left. So really football season's over at that point. Everyone's turned their head to basketball, and Auburn should be pretty ruckus for that game. Kentucky, you get them in Knoxville first. I think that could be beneficial because who knows what the Kentucky team looks like with so much turnover in Mark Pope's first year. Tennessee's obviously going to come out and understand the importance of beating Kentucky, though. That's always been important in basketball for Tennessee, is showing up for that game. Now you don't have Calipari there, but you want to get that next step on the right foot for Tennessee, even though it's not Calipari there anymore. You want to get that next coaching staff. You want to start to build that momentum on them as well. You don't want to fall behind in the series against a Mark Pope Kentucky team before he even really gets started. We touched on Florida earlier. That could be a good team. This time you get them at home. You'll have a game of film to look at. I think that plays into the hands of Tennessee, but we'll have to see what that Florida team looks like. After that, Missouri at home, Oklahoma on the road, and then you return the favor to Kentucky on the road. So nothing too crazy there. Missouri, really good one year in Dennis Gates' first year, not so good last year. We'll see how they look this year. I don't think they're going to be on the best side of things. Oklahoma on the road, that's a long road trip. That's a tough travel game, but Tennessee's probably the better team, so I don't feel horrible about Tennessee's chances heading over to play the Sooners. And then you have to go to Rep Arena, where, once again, Tennessee's played pretty well. I mean, they won the game last year. They couldn't miss a shot in Rep Arena last year. And it's a completely different roster, a completely different coach, but Rep Arena hasn't been too bright for Tennessee in the past under Rick Barnes, and you have a lot of those pieces returning, like a Zakai Ziegler, who's played well there. So Tennessee going on the road there, February 11th or 12th is when that Kentucky game on the road is going to be. Vanderbilt comes home next on February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. Texas A&M on the road could be tricky, February 22nd. That's been a little bit tricky at times for Tennessee. They've always put together some nice teams, so that's one. Another long road trip all the way out to College Station in Texas. Could that play a factor? We'll have to see. LSU, I don't think anyone's too worried about LSU men's basketball right now, but it is on the road, February 25th, 26th. You got 3 games left, and it's a decently tough 3-game stretch to finish things out. And I think that's kind of been the story on this schedule, is you have some games you probably feel good about to as much as you can in an SEC standpoint, and then you get like a 3-game stretch where you're like, okay, yeah, you got to really show up for those. And it's going to be Alabama at home March 1st. Don't have to tell you much about a Nate Oates team. Everyone's familiar with the success that Alabama's had. They made a really nice tournament run last year. Tennessee's going to have their work cut out for them. They did last year as well, though, and they ended up winning out in Tuscaloosa. So that's just like that Auburn series. It's gone both ways. It's been interesting to watch, but Tennessee's played pretty well in the series, and they could again this year. We'll have to see how Tennessee looks by the time that March comes around, though, because that's when that game will be played March 1st. So you'll really have a good idea of what these teams look like at this point in the schedule, which sometimes makes these games really fun to watch just because their identities are so carved out. I mean, you think back to that Alabama game last year. That was late on the schedule. Both of those teams knew exactly what they wanted to do. They went head-to-head. It was a really close game. It was a really fun game to watch, and Tennessee comes out with the win. I think we could see a similar thing that we did last year. This time, in Tennessee's advantage, it's going to be played in Knoxville. After that, Chris Beard and Ole Miss, you got to go out to Oxford and play them on either March 4th or March 5th. That could be a game that catches Tennessee. And then you close things out with South Carolina. Now, that's a team that was really good last year. I don't think they're going to be as good this year, but it's definitely not a game you can sleepwalk into and expect to win. That's going to be at home on March 8th. That's going to be senior day for Zakai Ziegler, Jemai Meshack, and a couple other guys. So that could be an emotional matchup as well. And you have to think Tennessee lost their senior day game last year against Kentucky. So how are you going to try to manage those emotions? Because I guess last year it didn't go as planned on senior day for Dalton Knecht, Josiah Jordan James, and Santiago Vespi, 3 seniors you definitely wanted to send out the right way. But that's going to be Tennessee's men's basketball schedule. What do predictions look like? I don't think this is an SEC regular season championship team. Could they? Sure. But if I had to put my money on it, I would go with the field. But this is a team that should be a really solid basketball team, once again, fighting for a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament as one of the top 16 teams. And then you see what happens once you're in the field. You get that high enough ranking or seeding in March Madness. I think that kind of top 4, top 16 lines where you want to be. And then from there, you just hope the cards fall in your favor. This past year, they did until they didn't. You felt good through 3 games. You get to your second ever Elite 8. And then you run into a buzzsaw on Zach Edey and Purdue. And I think you get pretty much anyone but Purdue or UConn in that Elite Eight, and there's a really good shot you're looking at your first ever Final Four. But at that point in the tournament, you got to play some really tough basketball teams that end up being Purdue. We'll see what Tennessee's looks like this year, assuming they make the field. I think that's a pretty confident guess, though, that they will make the field and be a decently high seed in it as well. But that's what the SEC schedule looks like. Let me know in the comments which game you're most looking forward to, and then which game is going under the radar. What's a game that maybe I just skipped right over, didn't want to talk about much? I flew through Vanderbilt. I flew through Georgia. Georgia gave Tennessee a run for their money. Dalton Knecht had to save the day again in Athens last year. Is that a team Tennessee should worry about at home? Is there someone else that I just flew right past in Oklahoma on the road that worries you and stands out on the schedule? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk some Lady Vols basketball, though, to finish things off. Kim Caldwell's first season. How is she going to put together her her out-of-conference schedule? Kelly Harper had that thing really stacked to the brim with talent. I mean, you look at some of those Lady Vols out-of-conference schedules when Kelly Harper was the head coach, and oh my gosh, there was numbers next to just about every team they played in terms of rankings. This year, if you look at ESPN's way too early top 25, just 2 teams make the cut on this out-of-conference schedule as far as teams that are in that ESPN way too early top 25. That's number 3 UConn and number 18 Florida State. But let's jump right into things. Some of these, not Kim Caldwell's decision, like a Liberty at home. That's a home and home from last year. MTSU, that's been a 3-game series that's been set where you played last year over in Alabama, and then now you're home. Then you go to MTSU the following year. So some of these, Memphis, some of these, you don't know, or you did know going into the Kim Caldwell era that they were going to be on the schedule and it wasn't up to her. Some of these, her decision. So let's see. Start things off with Carson Newman in an exhibition. That's kind of been the tradition for Tennessee in the past, where they've gone through and beat up on Carson Newman and got things started on the right foot. That's going to be the same situation this year as Tennessee gets things started with Carson Newman at home. That's Halloween night. So the season opener for the regular season is November 5th against Samford. This is actually the first meeting between Samford and Tennessee in women's college basketball. Tennessee shouldn't have any issue with that. I don't have any issue with scheduling a team like Samford either to get your schedule and your tenure as Tennessee's head coach started. You want to start on the right foot. So let's get some wins under the belt if you're Kim Caldwell as you head into what could be a turbulent season at times just because of how good this SEC is and how kind of inexperienced and young and different pieces you have on your Lady Vols basketball team. Right after that, UT Martin at home 2 days later on November 7th. Same situation where get a win, get some momentum rolling, get some numbers in the win column. And I don't think anyone can complain about those 2 games being scheduled to start things off against UT Martin, Tennessee, 14-2 all time. Right after that, though, things get a little interesting. November 12th, MTSU, this time at home, but Tennessee lost for the first time ever after 22 straight wins to open the series against the Blue Raiders. Tennessee falls to MTSU last season over in Rocket City. And that was a bad loss for Kelly Harper. And I think ultimately what was one of kind of the nails in the coffin that you talk about when a coach gets fired was losing to an in-state program that you shouldn't be losing to. Now, MTSU is a good program for their standard, and they made March Madness last year, and they always are kind of a disruptor in those brackets and cause challenges. But it's a game that Tennessee should not have lost. They were out without Jillian Hollingshed, and I want to say Rakia Jackson didn't play in that game either. I think she was still recovering, if I remember right. But even without those two, it's still a game you needed to win, and Tennessee wasn't able to do it. But now you get them in Knoxville, where things should at least fall back into Tennessee's favor. Right after that, you have Liberty at home. You went on the road last year and played Liberty and just dominated them right before New Year's. It might have been like New Year's Eve, I think that game was. But either way, you didn't have any issue. It was probably the most complete win of last season was that win over Liberty. I mean, they just dominated the Flames out there. You get 10 days off, November 26th. Western Carolina comes to town. Another situation. Get yourself a win while you can because it's going to get tough later on. Funny enough, Tennessee's only 10-7 against Western Carolina in program history. I thought that was a funny stat for Tennessee. You would think first I wouldn't have guessed they played them 17 times, and even if I did, I would have thought they were probably 17-0. And I know Like none of that's recent, but still, it's an interesting stat to look at. Then your first kind of big time challenge of the season, Florida State. We mentioned earlier they're number 18 in that ESPN way too early top 25. Well, Tennessee gets them at home this year as a part of the ACC SEC Challenge. They went to Tallahassee last season at the beginning of the year, and in a high scoring affair, I want to say it was 92-91. I know it was a 1-point game. Florida State wins. Rakia Jackson had a great game, but Tennessee didn't have enough in the tank to get past the Seminoles a year ago. Well, now you have them at home. Does that make a difference? We'll have to see. Tennessee doesn't have Rakia Jackson anymore, but Florida State's got to replace some pieces as well. So that's a game that is the first time we'll see Kim Caldwell go against an opponent where it's like, hey, you have to really show up and win this basketball game. MTSU's good, but even if things aren't all clicking on the right level, you could win that game at home. Florida State, everything has to go perfect, essentially, if you want to win that game. Florida State's a really good team. You're at home. It's the first time that it'll be the most packed game for Kim Caldwell at that point at home, I would assume, with Florida State coming to town. That's a game to definitely have circled on your schedule to see what this Kim Caldwell program is really all about. And it doesn't get much easier from there. 3 days later, on December 7th, you got Iowa up in Brooklyn, New York. Now, Iowa's without Caitlin Clark. It's a completely different basketball team, really, than it was a year ago when they were the runner-up in March Madness. But that's another team that you got to show up and win. I mean, just because Caitlin Clark's not there and things look a lot different doesn't mean you can just roll into Brooklyn and beat Iowa. You really have to show up for that game. So that's 2 games in a 3-day stretch where December 4th and December 7th that you've really got to show up and you've got to play really good basketball if you want to win. And I don't think it's out of the question that they drop both, but it's also, we'll have to see with Kim Caldwell, it's not out of the question that you win both. Let's say you win those 2, and if you win those 2, I assume you won the first games. I mean, things really start to look bright for Lady Vols basketball all of a sudden. If you can get those under your belt, I mean, you're probably talking about a top 25 ranking if you can go through December 7th undefeated. But Florida State and Iowa are going to be big tests in that. North Carolina Central is on the schedule after that, just a catch your breath type of game a week after that trip to Brooklyn on December 14th. But then you hit the road again, 6-hour road trip over to Memphis. It's on the road. You won in overtime last year. LVFL, Alex Simmons is the head coach for the Tigers. She plays a very similar style that Kim Caldwell does with that kind of high-tempo action. So that could be a just flat-out fun game to watch. But it'll be a game in FedEx Forum where the Grizzlies play, which is pretty fun, where the Lady Vols will face Memphis on the road. Then on December 20th and 21st, so just a couple days after that Memphis game, you're headed down to West Palm Beach for the West Palm Beach Classic. And Tennessee doesn't know its opponents yet. I'm looking up to see who else is in the field because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But you would assume it would be some good teams. Yeah, the released at a later date is from Tennessee's release, and I can't find all the teams in it at the moment. So I don't think Tennessee knows exactly who is going to be in that field with them. I think I see the men's teams, but I can't find the women's bracket. So we'll leave it at that. I would assume there would be some pretty good teams in that field, though, with those kind of mid-season tournaments. There usually is some good competition. So Tennessee could find itself in more games against way too early top 25 teams. We'll have to find out, I guess, once that's released. And then December 29th, leading into SEC play, Winthrop at home shouldn't be much of an issue. Once again, as Kim Caldwell tries to build that momentum back up heading into SEC play. The final non-conference game, UConn, February 6th. So definitely get your Sharpie out and circle that one on your calendar. Tennessee gets them at home this year in Knoxville, a game that Kelly Harper didn't do the best at with her time as the head coach with the Lady Vols against that big-time rival. The series sits at 17-9 in the favor of UConn. Now, the last time they played, 2023 in Knoxville, UConn won. They went to Hartford in 2022. UConn won. They went to Knoxville in 21, and that's a game that Tennessee actually played pretty well in, but ended up losing. And then 2020, out in Connecticut that they got beat to. So in those 4 games under Kelly Harper, they were really only competitive in that one in Knoxville in 21. The rest of them got pretty lopsided. But Tennessee's going to really want to get back on track in that rivalry. Going into that 20 campaign, from 05 to 07, there was 3 straight wins in the favor of Tennessee. That's a series that Tennessee is really going to want to kind of rebound at. It's Tennessee-Alabama football. It's that type of rivalry where the numbers aren't in your favor right now, but historically you're up there with them in present day is very important to kind of get back to that level where you're competing in those games. It's going to be February 6th. It's going to be in Knoxville. We'll see what UConn looks like this season. They're supposed to be really, really good. Number 3 in that way too early top 25. Paige Beckers is there. She could be the player of the year for the country. She is phenomenal. Tennessee's going to have their work cut out for them, but that is a game that Tennessee is going to really, really want to at least put a good showing out in Kim Caldwell's first season. We'll have to see what the SEC dates look like for women's basketball once that is revealed, but that is the out-of-conference slate for the Lady Vols in the 24-25 season. Just like I said, for the men's one, what's a game that I'm skipping over, didn't talk much about, that's going to be interesting? Maybe Liberty's going to be a little bit more sneakier this team after Tennessee kind of took it to them a year ago. What game are you most excited for? I would assume it's probably going to be UConn for everyone. That's always a fun game for both perspectives. But let me know in the comments. Head over to VolReport.com. We have coverage for everything basketball. And, of course, football season is here, 11 days away from kickoff inside Neyland Stadium. If you want everything that you need to know as far as Tennessee athletics, we have you covered over at VolReport.com. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.